We are now on Daf Nun Tes Omid Beis, and we are listing now other takonos. The Chacham Masaken, a takona called bar. What is bar all about? Let's say there's flowing water, and everybody wants to get some of that water. And this emas mayim, this source of water, which is dug into the ground, often dries up depending on the weather conditions. And then you might have a situation where different field owners that are contiguous to this emas mayim will have a fight. They'll battle over who gets the water that was collected in a bar, a cistern. And barshu karov li ama means the emas mayim, is mismale rishon. He has the right to fill up his bar because his bar is in close proximity to the emas mayim, and not allow and prevent all the other boros, excuse me, from drawing the water from the emas mayim until his bar is filled to the top. Another takana, mitzudas chayav yofos v'dogim. So you have nets that catch animals and birds and fish in the water. And although the chayav, the ofer, the dog is caught in so-and-so's net, but nevertheless he didn't make a kinyan on it. And the Rabbanan created a new kinyan, that once it's nitzod and there's a tzeda and it's already trapped in the net, yesh b'hem mishum gezel. If anyone wants to steal, he violates gezel. Mipnei darkei shalom. Now, these three words, mipnei darkei shalom, tell us that it's not real gezel. It's called gezel mipnei darkei shalom. It's a quasi similarity to gezel. But Rabbi Yossi disagrees, Omer. He says takonas chacham was ke gezel gomu, that the Rabbanan gave him kinyanim on that which was captured in his net, and anyone who takes it out of his net is a gazlon gomu. So it's not just darkei shalom, a new kind of quasi kinyan that's not really a kinyan, but rather it's gezel mamish. And we're going to have this machlokes over and over and over again. Mitzias cheri shot v'koton yesh b'hem mishum gezel b'nei darkei shalom. Rabbi Yossi Omer gezel gomu. If a child or a cherish or a shota finds a lost object, then according to Tanakama, it's gezel mishum darkei shalom. We don't want everyone to pounce on the koton and start fighting and grabbing it out of his hand. But Rabbi Yossi goes a step further. It's not just gezel mipnei darkei shalom, but it's gezel gomu, and the Rabbanon validated the kinyan of the cherish shota v'koton. Oni amenakev Berosh Hazayis, Masechet gezel mipnei darkei shalom. Rabbi Yossi Omer gezel gomu. If a person is cutting olives off the tree, the olive tree, and he has now climbed up to the top of the olive tree, and what he does is he throws down the zaysim that he has cut, and he has to go down now from the tree, descend onto the ground, and collect the zaysim. He hasn't yet made a kinyan on the zaysim until he does so. And the Rabbanan made a takana of Neish Darkei Shalom that no one's allowed to take the zaysim that fell from the tree by virtue of his cutting down the zaysim, even though he hasn't made it a formal kinyan. And Rabbi Yossi says the Rabbanan recognizes kinyan, and therefore if somebody steals, he's chayav mishum gezel gomu. The last takana listed in the Mishnah is ein memachin biad ani aniye ovdei kachavim beleket shikha upeya. According to the strict letter of the law, leket shikha upeya belongs to aniye Yisrael, to Jewish poverty-stricken individuals. But now the ovdei kachavim grabbed the leket shikha upeya. And according to the strict letter of the law, we should take that away from them and confiscate it, give it back to the aniyim. But we made a takana b'nei darkei shalom, so we get along with the goyim, and we recognize their ability once they took leket shikha upeya. The Gemara asks me, nani milu. what was the basis for the Takon in Kriyas HaTorah that the Chachamim chose the Kohen to be first, and then after the Kohen, the Levi, and finally the Yisrael, Rav Masna, the Omakra. And we have a number of possible limudim and droshos, according to Rav Masna, the droshos from a Pasuk in Dvarim Lamed Aleph, by Echtov Moshe HaTorah Azos V'yitna El HaKohanim B'nei Levi. And why does it have to identify the Kohanim as B'nei Levi? We know the Kohanim come from Shevet Levi. Oto Anolo Yadano, we don't know the Kohanim B'nei Levi. Ninu, the Gemara asks rhetorically, Ella, but it means Kohen Bereisha V'hada Levi. It's telling you that the Kohanim get the Kriyas HaTorah first, and the Levi gets second. So Levi gets Sheni. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar, he has a different pasuk. Mehacha. This is a pasuk in Dvarim Chaf Aleph, 10 prakim earlier. It says, "V'nikshu haKohanim b'nei Levi." And once again, Oto Anan lo yadanu and the Kohanim b'nei Levi ninu, Ella Kohen Bereisha v'hada Levi. Rav Ashi Omar, we derive from pasuk Divrei Yomi. Mehacha. B'nei Amram, Aaron, u'Moshe v'Yibodel, Aaron lakdisho kodesh kadoshim. And with the darshan from this pasuk that we have to be noeg vis-a-vis the Kohen, a special kedusha, lakdisho, and therefore we call him up first to the Torah. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Omar, mehacha from the pasuk of Vayikra Chaf Aleph at the beginning of Parshas Emor, v'kidashto ki es lechem Elokecha hu makriv kadosh yelecha. So we should be knowing kedusha vis-a-vis the Kohen, and we should be makdim him and give him first the first aliyah, and not only that, first for chol davar should be kedusha. Tana to pay Rabbi Shmuel v'kidashto l'chol davar should be kedusha liftoach rishon. He'll start the Kriyas HaTorah. If he's teaching Torah and there are other teachers of Torah, he'll be the first one to teach Torah. Levarich Rishon and Birkas Hazimun in a Suda, he will bench and be the Mezamen. And the Gemara has, just a second, in Masechet Nedarim, that he's going to be the first to recite Birkas HaMotzi, not just Birkas HaZimun after the Suda. And Litol Mana Yafa Rishon. So if at a Suda they're giving out the food, the portions, he'll get the best portion first. The Gemara in Pesachim adds Chaluka Shutfim, that when we divvy up a land amongst the heirs, then the Chelik Yafa will go to the Kohen. Amalei Abaye l'Rav Yosef, Mipnei Darki Shalom. I don't get it. Why does the Mishnah say, let's go back to the Mishnah, that we call up the Kohen Rishon because of Darki Shalom, meaning to avoid, kind of fighting over it. Doraisa, we learned it from all these psukim. And here we have a machlokas Rishonim how to learn this Gemara of Kibud Kohen. The Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs and also the Chinuch and many other Rishonim say that this is a mitzvah asay min Torah lechabed es hakohen. And as I state in that Gemara, the Gemara says midoraisa. Tosfos and Chulin, on the other hand, says that all these psukim are just an asmachta, and it's only a drabbanan. And the Bach says, well, what is he going to do with our Gemara says doraisi? And the Gemara and the Bach answers that a drabbanan that has an asmachta is like a doraisi. So the Gemara answers, Omer Le, Rav Yosef responds to Abayis Kasha midoraisa. Yes, you're right. The Kohen gets called up first because of the doraisa loch v'kidashto. But the reason why the Torah commands us, and that's what the Mishnah means, is mipnei darkei shalom. So a Kohen gets first dibs because of a kidashto, and that will hopefully avoid riv, because every person says, well, I should get the best portion, I should be served first, I should have the right to be mizamin. or to recite Hamotzi. And there's going to be a riv. So the Torah sets up the kiddush of the Kohen, and that will solve, hopefully, the problem of riv. So Abai says he doesn't understand Rav Yosef's answer here, and he rejects it. He says, "Kol Torah kulam nami darki shalom hi tichsiv drachet darki no mechol nesivos shalom." Yeah, you want to talk about darki shalom? You could say that every single law in the Torah is based on darki shalom. So why do you say that the law that the Kohen gets to be called up first to the Torah is based on darki shalom? Darki shalom applies drachet darki shalom mechol nesivos shalom to every law in the Torah. El Omar Abai says, no, the Seder, Kriya B'Torah is really Doraisa. Why did the Mishnah add Mibnei Darki Shalom? Look at Amar. In order to teach us the din of Rabba Bar Nachmani. The Sanya we learned to the Braisa, until Seftin Brachas Perek Hey, which is called Hilchas Derech Eretz B'Seuda. I never saw people being makpid on this. I don't know why. But anyway, it says here, Shnayim Amtinim Zelazeh B'Ka'ara. Let's say two people are eating together a meal, and one has to take a break. Maybe he has to drink something, maybe he has to go out and come back again. We have to wait for him. Don't continue the meal without him. Shlosha, if on the other hand there are three people eating together, ein mamtinim. Two don't have to wait for one if the one took a break. Botzea, he's the person who recites Hamotzi lechem in aretz on the pas, and he's motzi everyone yidei chovu poshet yado tchila. He should get served the first food, and that's called Kidei Lafes Es HaPas Shebirech Aleha. The pas on which the bracha of Hamotzi was recited is a Chefza Shel Mitzvah, and we should embellish it with a Lelafos Es HaPas, and therefore the Mavarech is Poshet Yodo Tchila. The Imba Lachlo Kovid LeRabo Lemisha Gadol Bimenu Rishus Biyado. If, on the other hand, the Botzea, who is reciting Hamotzi on behalf of the rest of the people, wants to give kavod to his Rebbe or somebody who's greater than him, and he wants to give them the tavshil to eat before he eats from the tavshil, he's allowed to do so. The Amar and Rabba Bar Nachmani made a comment on this brisa. Lo shana, when does this apply that a person is allowed to give cover to his Rebbe? Elabisa Uda. Suda means a private meal. You know, it's not like some sort of public meal where we invite the whole community. Avol bebeis hakneses, if we have a public meal, like for example in the synagogue on Yomim Tovim or whenever. Lo, then the Kohen is not allowed to be cholei kavod to a Rav and allow him to go before him. Because once you're going to allow the exceptions to the rule, then you're going to get into fights. You know, who is he going to be machabed, etc., etc. So therefore, the din doraisa is that a Kohen reads first. The drasha is a doraisa. However, we need Darkei Shalom to explain a case where the Kohen wants to be mavate, or he wants to waive on his kavod and be mochel on his kavod and give a Yisrael to read the first aliyah. He's not allowed to do so. Mipnei Darkei Shalom. Amar Rav Masna hadi amr bebeis hakneses lo. That which we said the Kohen is not allowed to be mavate on his kavod at a beis hakneses lo amar ela b'shabbosos yom tov d'shlichei rabbin. Only when we read the Torah publicly and all the people are there. It's like, for example, if I think about my father's synagogue where I was raised. So on an average Shabbos and Yom Tov, we would have 350 mispalalim. But on a Monday or a Thursday, we had, 20 mispalalim. Even though it's in the Beis HaKnesses, it's still ein Rabbi Mitzuyim, and therefore we don't have to worry about fights. So Gemara asks, Eini, is this really Sova? Rav Huna Kari Bekane B'Shabbosos V'Yomim Tovim. I don't understand. Rav Huna was not a Kohen, and yet he would get called up on Shabbos and Yom Tov, even in public, to read first. So you see, the Kohen is allowed to give the Rebbe his first Aliyah, even on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The Gemara answers, Shiny Rav Huna. Rav Huna was the gadol of his generation. The Afilu Rabbi Ami Rav Asi Kohanei Chashivi de Eretz Yisrael. Mechav Havakayf. Even the Kohanim Chashuvim of Eretz Yisrael, that's Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Nevertheless, they felt themselves kafuf, and they accepted the authority of Rav Huna. That's how great Rav Huna was in his generation, and therefore he gets the exceptional rule, and we'll call him up first, and the Kohen could be mochel on his coat. Amar Abaye Naktina, we have a chazaka from a tradition from our forefathers that Ein Sham Kohen Nisparda Chavilu. If there's no Kohen in the synagogue, then we don't give the Levi to read first. And here we have a machlokes in poskim, whether or not we can call up a Levi first, or we absolutely are forbidden to do so. The Ritva seems to indicate that Eino Kore Rishon, that he should not read first. Why? Because if the Levi reads first, they may mistakenly think that he is a Kohen. And the Ran in Masechet Megillah Chav Dalet in the Sugi of Kriyas HaTorah says that the Yisrael ein chashash zeh, kevan sheyodim shu Yisrael. Everybody knows that Yisrael is Yisrael, but Levi, maybe there's a chashash. People might think that that he's a Kohen. However, Rashi quotes Rabbi Yitzchak HaLevi, who says that if there's no Kohen, his batla seder halios, the efshel likros Levi b'chol makom. We can call up a Levi. We can even call up a Levi after Yisrael if there's no Kohen. Tosas here in this parada is of the opinion that what the Gemara has in mind is that the Levi doesn't read as a substitute for the Kohen, but he'll read after Yisrael. They'll call up Yisrael Rishon, and the Levi will get shade. The Sam Sofer sees a very fundamental yisod in our sugya, that the cover that we give to a Levi is because he serves the Kohen. If there's no Kohen, the Mela, the whole din of covered al Levi is bought. Amar Abaye, Naktinon, Ein Sham Levi, Kore Kohen. Now, you can ask what that means. Do we call up a second Kohen for Sheni? No. We're going to assume that according to Abaye, the first Kohen will now substitute for the Levi, because there's no Levi, and he'll get Sheni, he'll get the second Aliyah. Why do we give it to the Kohen and not to a Yisrael in an event that there's no Levi? Says the Ritva, if they would call up the Yisrael for Sheni, people might think he's a Levi. You should never call up two Kohanim. The Gemara now assumes that Abaye, when he says Ein Sham Levi, Kore Kohen, means a second Kohen, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, we will not call up a second Kohen. Why not? Mishum Pgamo Shel Rishon. People will assume that, you know why they called up a second Kohen? It must be that somebody did research on the first Kohen, and they determined that he's not really a Kohen. And if Levi Achar Levi, Rabbi Yochanan says, it's even more severe if you call up a Levi after Levi lo yikra mishum pgam shneya. We have a double chashash of pgam. Because if we're going to call up a second Levi for Shlishi, then people are going to think that the first one wasn't a Levi. That's why they had to call up a Levi. And they might say that the second one is not a Levi, but he was called up as a Yisrael because the third Aliyah is given to Yisrael. So there's going to be a possibility of a Pgam on the first Levi who got Shady and the second Levi who got Shlishi. In any event, we see clearly from Rabbi Yochanan that we do not call up a Kohen after a Kohen. And that's against Abaye. And the Gemara says, no. Ki Kamrina, what was Abaye referring to? Be also Kohen. that same Kohen who got Rishon will now Bimkom Levi get Sheni. And there's no Chash Las, because you see that he was right to be called up as an Aliyah for the first and for the second. Now the Gemara analyzes the words of Rabbi Yochanan. Why does Rabbi Yochanan say in the case of Levi, Achal Levi, Ika Pagam Shneim? He's worried about both a Pagam on the first Levi, who got Sheni, and the second Levi got Shlishi. And the answer is the Amri Chad Binayu Lav Levihu, because they're going to say that one of these two guys is not a real Levi. So there'll be a Chash Pagam on each one of these two Levim. So why didn't Rabbi Yochanan consistently say the same thing with regard to Kohen? Is Kohen Acher Kohen Nami? The same logic should apply. Amri Chad Minayu Lav Kohen. Or the people will think if you call up a Kohen after Kohen, one of them is not a Kohen. So therefore there's a Chash on both Kohenim. And yet, if you read Rabbi Yochanan carefully, he says Mishum Pgamo Shel Rishon. Why only the Rishon and not the Sheni? And the Gemara answers, but we'll see soon that the Gemara is going to reject this answer. We know that the second one, who got a Kohen, who was called up as Kohen after a Kohen, we know that he is a kosher Kohen. We know his father was a Kohen, and everything's fine. So the Gemara says, Hachinami, why don't you apply the same ukimta in the case of Levi Achal Levi, the Muksalam Avudai Sheni, the Leviu? Maybe we have a chazak on the father of the second Levi, that is a kosher Levi, and therefore we have no chash on the second Levi. And yet, Rabbi Yochanan says we have a chash on the pagam of both Levim. Ella, says the Gemara, Amri, they'll say that the father of the Sheni married who? Mamzeres Onesina Nosif. He married either Mamzeres or Onesina. And therefore his children are Pasul, Pasli, Lizare. And therefore his son is considered like Yisrael, and that's why he got Shlishi. So if you call up Levi after Levi, we're afraid that the second Levi might be accused in the minds of the spectator of being a Yisrael because he's Mufka and Pasul from Kedushas Levia, insofar as his father married a Mamzeres. Says the Gemara in Cain, Hachanami, you should be consistent with regard to a Kohen. If you call up a Kohen after a Kohen, Amri, people will say that even though we know that the father of the second Kohen is a Kohen, but maybe he married a Grusha or a Chalutza Nasi. The Achle Lazari is Machal Zera, Mikdushas Kuna. And that's why he was called Sheni and not for the first Aliyah, because he's not a kosher Kohen. So why is Rabbi Yochanan exclusively worried about the Pagam on the first Kohen and not on the second? Our answer is sof Levi mi kohav. He says the following: even if his father married a grusha or a chalutza and was machal his zaro mikdushas kahuna, what status does his son have? The son born to a marriage between a Kohen and a Grusha Chalutza. His status is that of the Yisrael. And therefore, how could we call him up as Sheni? The very fact that we call him up as Sheni means he still has Kedushas Levia. And that means for sure that he wasn't born as a Cholol insofar as his father was married to a Grusha Chalola. So there's no Chash Laz on the Kohen who gets Sheni. As opposed to the Levi who got Shlishi, there was a Chash Laz. The Gemara says, Ulaman, who are these people who are going to begin to be Choshesh that maybe, and there'll be Motzi Laz on the first Kohen, when they called up a Kohen after him, if they called the second Kohen. Ili Yoshvim, if you're talking about those who sit in the Beis HaKnesses, they were there from the beginning of the Kriyas HaTorah and on, Hakachazule. They saw that the Kohen was Ola Rishon, and they counted the Kohen together with Sheva Olim. they didn't require an eighth aliyah, they'll understand that he's not pogum. Ella, but rather, says the Gemara, who we worried about, liyotzim v'nichnosim, for those people who left the synagogue before they finished the kriya, so they don't know how many people were called up in aliyah. For their part, they might think that there were shmona, there were 8 people called up in aliyah because the first Kohen was pogum. Sholchu le'bnei Galila l'Rav Chelbo achreihem mikorim. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop. So let me wish you a great Shabbos and thank you for a week of learning. And we should be zoche to Binyan Yerushalayim. Shabbat Shalom.